I think she didn't think that I would actually accept her challenge. I think she was hoping that because she outranked me and that I was new and I was sort of reporting to her that I would not accept that challenge out of respect for her and her rank. So it's about respecting the rank. Yet she did challenge me.
A PhD psychiatric nurse practitioner joins the Army at age 40. Then, in basic training, finds herself in a physical duel with her unit commander.
All of those things are always still around us. In times of tragedy, we filter out the good.
And a military chaplain, steeped so often in the costliness of war, clings to the good she can find in our world and bring to the warfighters. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families, in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. Dr. Dawn Goldstein, relatively late in life, chose to put on the uniform of the U.S. Army, and as an older recruit in basic training, found herself the target of a leader. Dawn did not back down. And Laura Bender, a Navy and Marine chaplain, spent 2 decades supporting the men and women who bear the brunt of America's wars. Laura tells us how, time and again, she managed to find grace and give comfort and strength to those warriors. Let's listen first to Dawn Goldstein's Beginnings, performed by Melissa Price. Then I'll speak with author Dr. Dawn Goldstein.
Turning my Harley-Davidson Dynaglide into the strip mall parking lot, I trailed slightly behind my husband's Harley-Davidson Fat Boy. I steered into the parking space next to his. I lifted my visor and removed my helmet. I squinted from the bright blue Arizona sky and blazing sun. Neither one of us spoke. I felt apprehensive. I talked him into going to an Army recruiting station, thinking the Army might be a worthy alternative to contracting overseas. He muttered, "I never thought I'd walk into an Army recruiting station." He brushed past me in the parking lot. He walked through the door, me behind his large stature. He pontified about his 10 years plus in the Marine Corps as a recon ranger and his 6 recent tours in Iraq as an independent contractor. I, on the other hand, had no prior military history. I thought, why am I doing this? I started to turn around and walk back out when someone asked me what I did. Before I could answer, my husband announced, "She's a nurse." After an hour of questions and phone calls by the recruiters, the Army took me instead. His ego deflated, but his annoyance increased at the Army's missed opportunity. He soon deployed again as an independent contractor, this time to Afghanistan. I determined to jump through all the hoops to get commissioned as an Army nurse. I wanted to serve. My Army recruitment process continued for a year. I completed paperwork and more paperwork, a medical appointment, conversations, and visits from my recruiter. Finally, during a lunch break from work, I stood in an Army recruiting station on September 29th, 2009, swearing an oath to protect and defend. Alone. No family members to smile and take pictures of this moment. I never met the major who swore me in before. We never spoke again after the ink from our signatures dried. I felt empowered and excited, even with no one to share this pivotal event. However, I waited for my Army orders. The wait seemed like forever. One mid-December day, I received a welcome letter from the Army unit commander. I had received my Army orders just 2 weeks earlier and read the all-capital letters memo over and over. The orders looked Greek to me. I didn't understand anything except my first drill date, January 10th, 2010. She wrote that I was assigned to the 6253rd MSU, a medical support unit attached to the U.S. Army Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. The letter provided little information or instruction in preparing me for my first weekend drill. The letter identified a sponsor, Captain Miller, a direct commissioned physical therapist assigned to acclimate me to the unit and teach me the basics of being an Army officer. I did not attend officer basic training yet. That would come 2 years later. Imagine that. Preparing for my first drill started days before the momentous early Saturday morning. The fear of not having the correct uniform or saying the right thing gave me terrible stomach cramps, heart palpitations, and chest pain. I practiced an about face over and over on cement carpet in tennis shoes and combat boots. My feet felt bigger than my size 10 feet. What happened to being graceful, poised, and confident? My arm didn't bend correctly for a salute. I missed aligning my hand to the rim of my glasses. With an exasperated cry, I can't even salute! A sick feeling overwhelmed me. Mild panic attacks surprised me at unpredictable times. I didn't know the first thing about the Army or being an officer. What have I done? My husband assured me, "You would make a great Marine, honey. You'll make a great Army officer." He saluted me. I returned the salute. He snapped his hand down. The day arrived. I walked across the parking lot. On a cold January morning, the dark sky welcomed me to an unfamiliar setting. The activity on the Air Force Base at this hour surprised me. Military personnel hurried past to other nearby locations. Everyone wore weather-appropriate military uniforms. The temperature was a chilly 42 degrees. I missed the memo. I arrived wearing my IPFU t-shirt, shorts, white socks over my ankles, and tennis shoes. I realized that I was not fully dressed in the designated PT gear. Others waiting to enter the building wore long black PT pants and a gray sage green jacket that glowed in the dark. I shivered with each cold wind that whipped through the long tan buildings. I couldn't stop my knees from shaking. As a new direct commissioned officer, I looked around for other men and women dressed like me, the word Army on their IPFUs. If someone were to ask if I knew what IPFU stood for, I wouldn't be able to answer. My stomach flipped. I followed a few Army soldiers towards the Air Force PJ hangar entry. I searched for my sponsor amongst a gathering of individuals wearing the same Army PT gear, but no one had any identification. Small groups murmured. Everyone looked weary, but then again, it was 0500. My teeth chattered, but I didn't feel cold. I felt awkward and out of my comfort zone. The PJ's hangar stored mission-essential equipment and served as a location to conduct training. My Army unit used this hangar for our training this drill weekend for combatives. A hefty 40 by 20 thick mat spanned the floor, and equipment cages lined the back of the room. We all stood around the mat listening to the Air Force PJs who conducted our Army combative training. A petite, short-haired blonde called my name. "Lieutenant Goldstein?" She pointed to the edge of the mat next to her. She shouted orders all day. "Lieutenant, put your things here. Don't sit there. I am assigning you as the safety officer." The list went on each time she spoke. I watched her mouth move to see what she was saying. I felt nauseated and my pulse raced every time she shouted an order. I studied her movements, mannerisms, and military bearing meticulously that morning as we learned combative grappling moves. We prepared for scrimmages for Sunday's drill. Other soldiers avoided me, even other new officers. I soon realized that everyone but the commander despised her. I watched soldiers responding to her repeated shouts. Whispers behind her back, snide, belligerent comments, and other fellow officers dodged her. She snapped at everyone. She humiliated enlisted and officers alike, especially if she caught someone sleeping in the classroom during any mandatory classroom training. She ordered me to do simple tasks. Why did this tiny, frail woman cause such anxiety in me? She barked, "Get your officer evaluation report started." I had no idea what she was saying. Where can I find it? Just Google it, Lieutenant. I felt lost and frustrated. Anger filled me with each of her disrespectful and humiliating remarks. Combative training on the Air Force PJ hangar continued Sunday. I remembered a few basic moves and the key components: close the distance, gain a dominant position, and finish the fight. We all repeatedly practiced, grappling with learning these basic moves. I grappled against one female after another. I won and determined that not one female in my unit would beat me. The grappling assignments were random. I tapped out from a rear chokehold from a 225-pound enlisted soldier. He apologized. "Sorry, ma'am, I gotta choke you out." I held out, unable to breathe. I submitted. The large tan mat and smell of sweat became familiar. My knees throbbed and were visibly swollen from the second day of ground grappling. Last grappling match. Captain Miller avoided all hand-to-hand combat during this drill weekend. The PJ instructor petitioned her to grapple. She conceded. She looked right at me. "LT, let's go." Everyone stopped talking. The cold January wind blew. Was she daring me? I looked around. Heads were shaking. Eyes darted away from mine. She repeated her demand. Shrugging, I stepped into the middle of the mat. Captain Miller stood 6 inches shorter than me. My weight doubled her weight. Why me? She puffed up her chest, tossed her shoulders back as she kneeled. She smirked. I kneeled in front of her, my knees burning with pain. The instructor shouted, "Go." I lunged and pushed her light, frail body. She landed with her back against the mat. I pinned her shoulders down. Soldiers cheered. I let her up, and she immediately demanded another round. Again, I pinned her without any struggle or strain. The cheers grew louder. I saw shocked looks from the enlisted and officers alike. They were in disbelief that I would choose to beat her. She knew she couldn't win. I refused to lose. She made me pay for that choice for another 6 months. After I became the company commander, she returned to visit my unit to take her last APFT and mandatory Army sexual harassment, assault response, and prevention training before getting out of the Army. I peered into the classroom before walking in. Our local sexual assault response coordinator presented the training at the front of the classroom. I scanned the room for Captain Miller. She sat alone in the back row, her head tilted forward, eyes closed. I tapped her shoulder and whispered, "Captain Miller, stand up and move to the back of the room." She woke suddenly. She rose from her chair and moved near the back wall without saying a word, her eyes fixed forward. I smiled and stood tall.
I'm joined by Dr. Dawn Goldstein, Army retired Major. Dawn, that story is about 2 very distinct things. One is joining the military a little bit late in life, but getting in there and being a fully formed, mature person, right?
Mhm.
You're not a kid. You joined the Army at 48.
Yes.
And at age 48, Captain Miller tries to brace you up. like you're going to back down. Walk me through what you were thinking. I mean, because you said she knew she couldn't win. You knew you weren't going to lose. If you'd been 19, would you have had that confidence?
No, and I think that's why I saw sort of this blank, these wide-eyed stares and disbelief from others in my unit who were much younger than me, who looked at me like they couldn't believe that I was actually going to do that.
But everybody disliked this captain. We hear this a lot, sadly, in the Mighty Penn podcast and in the stories about failures of leadership.
Yes.
Because it's so important for those of you who sacrifice and wear the uniform and go and do these dangerous and adventurous things and sometimes costly things that the least the Army and the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force and the Coast Guard can give you is a good leader. And this Captain Miller wasn't. What was her failure particularly?
Well, I think rising through the ranks doesn't mean you learn leadership or you have leadership qualities and characteristics. This was just an individual who I believe at the root, at the core, was insecure. But she knew she outranked many in our unit. So that empowered her. And unfortunately, when someone might be really insecure and they get a bit of power, they have the potential to, usurp that and treat others poorly. We saw that across the board in that unit.
Why do you think she singled you out? By your own testimony, you outweighed her. You were taller than her significantly. Was it because she thought, I can take that old gal? I mean, what was she thinking?
No, I think she didn't think that I would actually accept her challenge. I think she was hoping that because she outranked me and that I was new and I was sort of reporting to her that I would not accept that challenge out of respect for her and her rank. So it's about respecting the rank. Yet she did challenge me. And maybe there was something to that she wanted to see if I would,
No, you respected the game.
Oh, I respected the game.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Your military career is the only one of which we've had in the Mighty Penn. You are a PhD psychiatric nurse. You were stationed mostly in Landstuhl, Germany. And repeat for me what your career was. It was remarkable.
I spent a life of being a nurse in different roles and moving into academia and feeling that I needed more to my career. And this I started back, in 2010. We were still involved in Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. And I felt a real desire, a real call to serve. Now, yes, I did have a spouse who was deploying numerous times. I felt deployed. I felt like I had an understanding, but not really at all. And I thought, what a great way to augment my career, but also serve those who are serving our nation. As a nurse greater than 25, 30 years, I thought, what a perfect opportunity, what a perfect time to really take care of those who were suffering, especially from, we saw so much PTSD come out of those two wars.
Your job, as I understand it, was young warriors coming off the line from the war in terror, Iraq, Afghanistan, and if they had had some mental health issue that was significant enough to flag them, they'd be evacuated off the line, brought in from downrange, and you would interview them. And you would decide if they just needed a day or two and could go back, or if they needed to stay and receive further evaluation. I mean, Dawn, that is an awesome responsibility. That's a responsibility just shy of life and death. I don't know that somebody younger than you could have done that. I mean, you must have felt that your experience and, maturity helped you make those determinations. Those are dire determinations. And you had to make them kind of snap. You had to make them after sometimes one interview, yeah?
That's generally all I had is one interview.
What made you exceptional in that role, do you think?
I don't know if there's one thing that made me exceptional in that role, but I know part of nursing, part of my career choice is about empathy and compassion and looking at somebody in a holistic manner. And so I go into everything thinking in that respect and developing trust and really coming to someone in an empathetic way and learning about their story and how can I help them the best and what in that particular situation, based on their presenting symptoms, what would be the best choice. And really, a lot falls on my communication and how I can get them to understand the severity. Their safety is of utmost importance. So there's not one thing that got me and culminated to this. It's taken 30 plus years as a nurse. It's taken additional education and training, but it was very rewarding. It was very disappointing to not do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. PTSD, something that you're intimately familiar with, service. Dawn, as a Mighty Pen writer and as somebody who has personal experience and much professional experience with PTSD, can you address the value of writing those stories down? You've done it. You've seen others do it.
Writing down stories, your experience, there's an artistic expression to it, but there's also a very therapeutic component to it. And sometimes individuals may have these stories bottled up and they've not shared them with family, with friends. They don't want to think about it. You had mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, one of those clusters of symptoms is I get a little bit numb and I avoid thinking of those memories because they're triggers. But this is a means to express it on paper. And there is a cathartic component to it. Yet for me, it was also a way that I could artistically express maybe something that wasn't as powerful as somebody going through Vietnam. But it's my experience, my lived experience. And that helped me bridge together what I view as scholarship in nursing, because nursing is a science and an art. And so it allowed a different artistic expression for me as somebody who's in academia.
Dawn, I remember the night you first came to the Mighty Pen class. You sat there and all around you was Marines and Vietnam combatants and crazy adventure people and folks who had done remarkable things and had lived through remarkable eras and events. And you were worried that your experience as a nurse might not have stood up to theirs. You were a little worried about your place in the class. And I remember vividly when you told them that you were essentially an intake officer for soldiers coming in off the line from downrange and Germany, and that you brought such compassion and wisdom to your role. I remember you got a round of applause. And these cats don't do that. They don't clap for each other. But when you told them what you did, it meant so much to them to having somebody like you, not somebody like you. It meant so much to them of you caring for them if and when they could no longer carry that burden, right? To know that there was a Dawn Goldstein backing them up. It meant a lot to them and they applauded you. And that's one of my favorite Mighty Pen moments.
That was very significant for me because you're right. I came into this not knowing what to expect and not feeling that I fit the general military background history experience. And it was affirming. And it really did make me feel like I did something significant. And that was really fulfilling. Challenging to write stories to the caliber of some of the other participants, but it really felt like I was accepted. And that meant a lot.
Well, I mean, you joined at 48. Most of these cats had their 25-year pension done by the time you joined. So, Dawn, at the end of the story, you're a company commander, and there is Captain Miller asleep under your command, and she's been delivered unto you. What was it like leaning in and just kind of going on your feet, back of the room, wake up? I mean, come on, there must have been.
There was definitely a reward to that.
There you go.
And it was a payback, but a very subtle, very professional payback.
Well, it's best served cold, ain't it? Dr. Goldstein, Dawn, Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, our second story, Ordination, by Laura Bender, read by Caitlin Nolan. Afterward, I'll speak with Laura about her long career and the tests of her faith as a military chaplain.
In 1986, I kneeled before a United Methodist bishop to be ordained as a deacon. 3 years later, after successfully completing a probationary period, the same bishop ordained me as an elder. In both formal services in front of God, friends, family, hundreds of clergy, and 2,000 Methodists representing 565 churches in the New York metropolitan area, he placed his hands on my head. Take thou authority as a deacon in the church to preach the word of God and to serve all God's people, he said during the first ceremony. Take thou authority as an elder in the church to preach the word of God and to administer the holy sacraments, he said during the second. Turns out, these formal ceremonies had nothing to do with my ordination. Midway through the second day of the retreat for new deacons, I received a call from the senior pastor. He told me a 25-year-old parishioner, pregnant with twins, had developed complications and would soon lose her babies. He wanted me to drive 2 hours north to Albany Hospital to provide pastoral support. I hesitated. This is a serious issue that warrants the experience of the senior pastor. This is a woman's issue, and you are the woman on staff. But you're a father. You would be better able to help than childless me. I'm the senior pastor who makes the decisions. I drove north, ruminating on my 26-year-old inadequacies and inexperience. I had never witnessed a birth or a death. I had not baptized a baby, nor conducted a funeral. Although much of what I had learned in seminary had been interesting, even as I studied, I knew it would be irrelevant. What had 3 years of Koine Greek taught me I could use in this situation? Even the lame case studies acted out by uncomfortable seminarians for our mutual edification had given me no insight. The senior pastor, the real pastor, should be making this call. At the hospital, in the stark waiting area next to the delivery room, I found the twins' grandparents and 2 other couples from the church. The grandfather stood to greet me. I asked, "Any word from the doctor?" "The foot of one of the boys broke through her cervix and caused an infection. If they don't induce labor, all 3 will die from sepsis, and if they do," his wife finished the sentence, "we'll still have a daughter." "Is your son-in-law here?" "Brian's in the delivery room with Kim." I asked the other couples to join us in a circle. I led them in prayer. At least this was something useful I knew how to do. Then we took seats to wait. Hours passed. We fidgeted. Reading a magazine felt disrespectful. Conversation seemed awkward. I fetched coffee for everyone. Twice. After midnight, the delivery room door opened. The neonatal physician called into the waiting room. "Which one of you is the pastor?" Timidly, I raised my hand. "Come in. She's about to give birth to the second one." As I entered, he turned to me. On his palm lay a baby, 25 weeks from conception. "I don't know what you want me to do with this." He handed the child to me, then leaned in close. "This one is dying. The other one will too." As he spoke, Kim looked toward us. I smiled, hoping my face would not expose the words I had just heard. I held the baby out for her to see. His head lay on my fingertips, his feet extended only to my wrist. Kim managed a quick smile, then returned to birthing her second son. Everyone in the room was busy but the tiny boy and me. I sat silently. You will not be here long enough to experience the joys of this world. Right now, outside this place, twinkling stars dot the night sky. In a few hours, the sun will rise and fill the land with color. majestic dark green pines, maples shimmering red and gold, oaks turning orange against the pale blue sky wafted with fluffy white clouds. Nearby, cool mountain streams tumble over rocks, furry bunnies scamper, and crisp apples hang from branches, waiting to be enjoyed. I told him about ice cream and cake and how delightful to eat it surrounded by family and friends, especially when there's something to celebrate. I said he had arrived in this world because of love, and although he would be with us only a few minutes, he would never be forgotten. I told him Jesus loved him. He would soon see him face to face. I continued to hold the tiny baby and smile, though everyone else, his parents, the nurses, even the doctor, were fighting back tears. After the second child was born and Kim made ready, a nurse wheeled her across the hall where family, friends, and the delivery room staff had gathered for the baptism. Brian stood near his wife, and the nurse placed the boys in their open hands. I pulled my new book of worship, pocket edition, from my purse and searched for the right page. Dearly beloved, baptism is an outward and visible sign of the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, through which grace we become partakers of his righteousness and heirs of life eternal. By the time the sacrament was complete, the babies were dead. During the long drive home in the early light, I had time to reflect. How had I remained composed, dry-eyed, and able to focus despite my inexperience? I had arrived at the hospital scared, longing to be rescued by a real pastor. Then, seeing the family in distress, I did what they needed. How was that possible? Then the answer came. At the moment, God required the presence and service of a pastor. God ordained me. March 20th, 2003, the invasion of Iraq. Bunker, bunker, bunker. The word got louder as the corpsmen approached. What does that mean? I asked a nurse with whom I shared a tent in Kuwait. Before she answered, a chief corpsman ran by us. MOPP gear, shelter, incoming missile, run! He motioned for us to catch up to him. We grabbed the gear we were not already wearing and took off for the sandbagged wooden shelter dug next to the berm 100 feet away. In the dark, I slid down the steep sand slope and landed on my butt. Get inside, gear on, now. I pulled the gas mask out of the case attached to my left thigh. I held it against my face, blew out the dust, and sucked in to create a tight seal. I took off my helmet, drew the mask straps over my head, and pulled until it held firmly. Once I could breathe, I replaced the helmet. Then I took the charcoal-lined suit out of its bag and put it on over my uniform and flak jacket. After securing the coat and pants, I stuck each combat-booted foot into a floppy rubber galosh and finished the ensemble with a pair of gloves. Around me, the shuffling diminished, then stopped as others completed donning their gear. In pregnant silence, we awaited our fate. Startled grunts accompanied the sound of the scud making an impact in the distance. I closed my eyes. Oh God, may it have landed on nothing but empty desert, and please, please, may it not set off our sensors. The instant death of a direct hit paled in comparison to exposure to chemical and biological agents. We waited in silence. With all our gear, there could be no words of comfort, no reassuring smiles, no feigned bravado or stupid comments. Near me, someone began to shake. It started as a barely audible quiver that intensified as I moved closer. I switched on my red lens flashlight. I barely made out the young Marine standing in front of me. New to the Corps, this was his first deployment. I remembered a conversation about his sweetie back home. She was still in high school. His shaking grew worse as he hyperventilated in his mask. I touched his arm, but his panic only increased. I put the red glowing lens against the glass in my mask, and I stuck my face in front of his. Then I switched off the light, stepped up to him, and put my arms around him in the darkness. Reaching up, I leaned his head on my shoulder and patted his back like a mama pats her baby. Eventually, his shaking stopped, and he breathed as normally as one can in a gas mask. By the time the all clear was called, he'd returned to himself. We both wandered into the night, without saying a word. Back at the tent, I could not sleep. I must have been out of my mind to think I should be here. What could I do to help these people? If a Marine is panicked by our situation, how am I going to keep my head on straight? Our unit, Bravo Surgical Company, was in Kuwait waiting to be called forward to provide near frontline care in a field hospital. How would I be able to do what they would soon ask of me? I was scared too. These people needed a chaplain, and theirs was quaking in her combat boots. At sunrise, I joined our tired bunker party for muster, then headed to the chow hall. With nothing to do all day but wait for the next inbound missile, we lingered over coffee. Bunker, bunker, bunker. Do any of you hear that? It sounds like someone is yelling bunker again. This isn't funny. I took a sip of the brown liquid swill in my cup. Bunker, bunker, bunker. The voice grew louder. Oh shit, run! An anesthesiologist called as she raced toward the open tent flaps. White plastic chairs flew every which way as we made for the exit. En route to my assigned fortified hole in the ground, I ran into my tent to grab my MOP suit and boots. An envelope lay next to them on the cot. I took it too. Once in the bunker, I donned my gear and waited. At least now we could see. Thud. Closer than last time. Talc-like sand fluttered from the wooden ceiling. While I waited on the sensors, I noticed the envelope sticking out of my charcoal jacket pocket. I must have stashed it there as I dressed. Curious, I held it in front of my gas mask. A letter. A genuine letter. Had our camp's postal system finally started working? Until now, we could not get mail in or out. Our camp's address had changed 3 times. The cancellation mark said Poughkeepsie, New York. The return address told me it had come from the grandparents of the twins. We had not seen each other in over a decade. How did they know I was in the Navy, serving with Marines in the Middle East, and how had they found my address? I slipped off one glove to open the flap. Inside, I found a note and a photo of 2 older teens I did not recognize. Tears filled my eyes as I read the letter over and over. In it, the couple said they felt compelled to write when they learned I had deployed. They needed to remind me that no matter how scared I might be or how inadequate I might feel, they knew for certain I was not alone. They wanted to reassure me that God, who had given me the strength to help them when they lost their grandsons, would not fail or forsake me in whatever lay ahead. The couple ended by saying that if the twins had lived, the boys would have been almost old enough to be with me in Iraq, and assured me that as I had cared for them, I would be able to care for the young people who are with me. As evidence of God's providence and grace, they enclosed with the letter a photograph of their grandchildren. I remembered then that after losing the twins, their daughter had been told she would not be able to have children. But there they were in the photo, smiling at me. I know who wrote that letter. I also know who sent the message. The timing was impeccable. Just a few hours after admitting I didn't think myself capable of doing what I had been called to do, God sent a response in the words of a couple I had always admired for their strong faith. I placed the letter and photo back in the envelope and stuffed it in my cargo pocket, where it stayed throughout my combat deployment. As we cared for the severely injured in our field hospital in very austere and frightening conditions, it served as my daily reminder. God was paying attention. He had ordained me for this work. As long as I showed up to do it, so would he.
I'm joined again by Laura Bender, author of Ordination. Chaps, I want to start with that moment in the first half of Ordination where you're holding this premature child in the palm of your hand, and it's a new experience for you. And your instinct was to tell this child, its spirit, of all the beautiful things in the world of bunnies and ice cream and fluffy clouds. That felt so powerful to me, hearing that choice. And instead of seeing the massive tragedy of the moment, you chose to tell this child, you'll only be here for a few minutes, and here's all the beauty you missed. That instinct has to be what's carried you through this whole career. This ability to see, as we've said, faith and grace in sometimes such terrible circumstances. Yeah.
All of those things are always still around us. In times of tragedy, we filter out the good, and it's still there. We just have to see it or try to feel it or try to experience it.
In times of tragedy, we filter out the good. I almost want to have that on my tombstone. That's beautiful. So let's shift away from the first half of that story and jump right into the action where you're worried about chemical warfare and you're holding this frightened Marine. Is there a link in holding that Marine? When you were holding him, did you want to whisper in his ear about bunnies and clouds and ice cream with family?
Yes, of course. And the only resource I had in that moment was touch, and barely that through all of our gear. But I wanted him to be reminded of a place of calm that he probably felt as a small child with someone patting his back and holding him. And that's all I could do. So I did what I could.
I've noticed, knowing you for years now and working with you, that you revel in the challenges. You feel that of all the chaplains, all the men and women of faith, that you are always in the right place at the right time. The ordination isn't just into the status of being a member of your church, but ordained for these terrifically difficult moments. And I know that you've written, one of my favorite lines is that when you were done with your career as a pastor and a chaplain, that you were empty, that you even felt you'd been broken.
Mm-hmm.
And you were glad of it because it meant you'd given your all. Tell me how different you feel from other members of the church who, like in the opening of this story, said, nah, you do it. Would you have ever said to somebody under your authority, no, you go?
No, I would have said, we'll go, and I'll help you learn how to do this, because I won't always be a chaplain. I won't even always be here. And someone needs to carry on the ministry of caring. So I need to leave people behind me who can care for people like I thought it was important to care for people. There was an incident a few years ago when one of our sailors was dying from an accident, and my junior chaplain that I supervised showed up at the hospital, and he said, oh, you're here, I guess I can leave. And I said, have you ever seen anyone die? And he said, no. I said, then you're staying, because you need to see this so that you'll be able to handle this well in the future. And so he stayed, and it felt funny to be teaching someone how to help someone die well, but I feel like that is kind of a legacy that we need to leave to the next generation of people who care.
I have to ask, Laura, if you could, you said teaching people how to do this. I mean, the fact that being there for the dying is a skill that can be taught. Can you, I'm almost afraid to hear the answer, but can you give me a 1 or 2 minute masterclass in that?
Well, I think it starts not with the person who's dying, but with the person who's with them. That you have to be the non-anxious presence in the room, that you have to see this as a normal thing that happens in life, and that there are very human aspects to it. There's a need to let that person know they're not alone, to give people the opportunity to say their last words. It's important to use touch. I often would hold the hand of a person who was dying so that they could feel, if they can't speak or they're barely there, for them to know that they are not by themselves. And if a person is with them, hopefully they're also feeling that God is with them. A person in that moment is almost God in the flesh, trying to represent God in that moment.
You're a gal from the New York metropolitan area.
I was born in Brooklyn, can you tell?
Only if I'm at a red light and you're behind me. Or green light, right?
New York minute.
Yeah, no. That's the definition of a nanosecond, is the amount of time between when the light turns green and a New Yorker honks, right?
That's it.
That's you. So can you tell me why you? Look, you're clearly exceptional. Everybody in the Mighty Pen who's read your stories and has come to know you knows that you're exceptional. And whether you can admit that or not, where does this courage come? I know where the faith comes from. There's plenty of people of faith, and good for that, right? But this courage to walk forward when others hesitate or turn away, can you identify it in yourself? I don't want to die anytime soon, but I want you there, Laura. And why? Why do I want Laura Bender there? What is it about you?
Well, the story about the twins is actually very formative for me. That was really the moment that I realized that it didn't matter how I felt. If I felt inadequate, if I felt too young, if I felt too inexperienced, it didn't matter. My greatest ability was to be there and do what the person needed. And I felt that God would give me the strength to do that. And I only learned that through that experience. That was my first baptism. That was my first birth to witness. It was my first death to witness. And then I did the funeral as well. So it was firsts for me in everything, but I had never really experienced up until that moment that God would equip me to do what God called me to do. Previously I thought I'd have to be able, and it turns out God made me able.
You are a Marine in that you hold your ground. You stay in your post. Laura, big fan. Thank you so much. You know how fond I am of you. And Semper Fi.
Semper Fi as well.
Thanks, chaps. The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. And if you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces, many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. And lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor.